Hello.
Thanks for coming down to our second music event here in the Bookshop. I must say the lighting is a lot better this time. Thank you, Nic. Happy to say that Nic is back, and this time is with the RhythmEarth Trio. Nic's performance last time raised £400 for Gaza, and tonight should be similar, so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, even more actually tonight.
Brilliant. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please put your hands together for the RhythmEarth Trio.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming down. I'd like to introduce the wonderful Simon Whittaker on the drums. Tim Cole on the bass. And Nic Saunders on piano. And this is RhythmEarth Trio. We're going to be doing a few of our tunes that sort of relate to today's cause. And the first one is called Till Tomorrow. And we're going to start, it starts with a 13-year-old Palestinian boy singing, I think only a couple of days ago. If I can find it. Okay.
الألم سوف نحيا هنا سوف يحلو النغم موطني 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 يا أنا رغم كيد العدا رغم كل النقم سوف نسعى إلى أن نعم المعن سنواصل المسيرة نحو غاية أهم ونكون خير أمة عم المعن سوف نبقى هنا كي يزول الألم سوف نحيا هنا سوف يحلو النغم ذكرينا يا بقايا الأمس فينا إن أقسى الحنينا زادنا الشوق أنينا حدثينا ملأ الجدران خرسا
Thank you very much. I thought that was an appropriate piece that's by Horace Silver, a great legendary jazz pianist, and it was called Peace. It's a lovely tune of his.
You wait to see.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, it is. Okay. Now, if somebody could pick a book behind me.
Page 27.
There's a title of a book here called Word on the Street. I didn't put that there myself, but actually that's the name of this next piece. The Word on the Street. As you know, there's been so many things. If you're a journalist, especially if you work for the BBC, there's certain words on the street that you're not allowed to say. Apart from that, they're great. So just us to start.
Yeah.
Hands. Simon Whittaker on the drums there. Tim Cole on the bass.
Yeah, that book was a really good inspiration.
We'd like to share this piece that has actually now been recorded by 7 or 8 piece band, which we're hoping to put out soon in aid of the Middle Eastern Children's Alliance, and it's called Gaza Baby. And I was listening to an interview by the writer Omar El-Akkad, who's written a fantastic book called One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And he said something about the reasons for writing his book, and it made me think, yeah, that's the reason I wrote this piece, Gaza Baby. So I'd just like to read it to you.
Can't turn that up.
There comes a certain point where you have to contend with the highest purpose of art, which is to say something about being human. And so it becomes impossible for me, as much as I want to, and I tell you now, and this is an act of cowardice on my part, I want to go back to writing about the moon. I want nothing more than to retreat to my comfortable home on the launching sites of the missiles where my tax dollars pay to kill these kids. And I want to disappear and write my silly stories and live in the art because I have the privilege of all those things. There's just a certain line that has been crossed where I can no longer call myself a writer when I have abandoned too much of the obligation to say something about what it means to be human. By looking away from this. And so I tell you, as a coward, that I would much rather have not written this book, not have been put in a position to write this book. I don't know what this book is going to do, if anything, but you have to at some point wonder what the hell it is you are. And I thank everybody for coming out and supporting, and I think it's an incredible contribution that everybody's made to come and sit in this bookshop. And this is the piece Gaza Baby.
some more. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we're going to play a few more. This is carrying on from the terrible theme. And this was written very recently. I wrote this very recently as a play on the beautiful tune that Billie Holiday made famous, God Bless the Child. And with the with the news that, like, since the ceasefire broke, 100 children have died every day. So this is called the title of what you hear a lot when you hear reporters talking about the news, many of them women and children.
How are we doing?
All in on one. What tempo are you on?
Sounds good.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much for that. We're gonna do a couple of jazz tunes. The first one by the famous Keith Jarrett, the wonderful piano player. It's one of my favourite tunes of his. It's called Country. Everyone's still here. Maybe they locked the door or something. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. It's grand doing a bookshop, playing the bookshop. That's a big thing. It's all right for San Francisco. I've seen them in San Francisco, so Chichester's almost the same. Yeah. Not so many hills and crime. So thank you so much. I thought a really great. Somebody, not you, lady, man. John Lennon is right behind you on vinyl there. The great John Lennon Imagine album. So I thought, let's finish with Imagine. Yeah. Buy this book, because I was going to read something else, but I don't want to bum you out too much. But it's a very moving book. One day, everyone will have always been against this. Or you can catch him, he's done about 1 million interviews online promoting. So, this is Imagine. Think about the words of Imagine. Imagine there's no religion, nothing to kill or die for. So, thank you so much for supporting this cause. And these chords were given to us by a wonderful LA saxophonist called Ben Clapworthy. And they're just very, very moving version of this piece. Hope so. And thank you again, Tim Cole, Simon Whittaker. I'd like to thank Patrick and John. Who, when I came in and just said, yeah, I think this would be a great place for a gig. Have you ever seen the Tiny Desk gigs on YouTube? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And so it's been really nice. This is the second one. And let's hope, well, yeah, I wish we wouldn't have to do this, but let's hope we'll continue as long as it takes. Thank you. So much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you to Tim Cole. Thank you to Simon Whittaker.
How is he coming?